relationships among variables. I found chapter 3 really interesting because a lot of the relationships among the variables are things that I have already been using and putting into play in my professional life. My day job is working as an accountant, and there's a lot of things that I've learned over time as an accountant using Excel, and I've become a very strong user in Excel, which is great. And a lot of the formulas that are talked about in chapter 3 are ones that I utilize to build spreadsheets for communicating with operations, relationships, and then also for invoicing customers. One of the ones I like the most is the count if functions. I use the sum if function, and I use that to build a monthly invoice to my customer. I'm actually in the middle of doing that process for our June numbers right now. And so I use, I have 300 plus lines of data, and it's basically a line of data for every paycheck and every cost center that employee worked on. And so if Joe Smith worked on cost center ABC, there's one line for that. And then if he worked on cost center DEF, there's a line for that. And then that happens with each paycheck. And on this particular one, our employees are paid weekly. And I have to combine all that data. It's pretty intense. It's got a lot of detail because this is also what's used to, our customer reimburses the company for all of our expenses related to that employee. So their health insurance, taxes, all this kind of stuff. And then they pay a markup, but the markup they pay is only on those labor hours. So I take all this data and I put it in, and then I have to summarize that though by the cost center. So the company that I'm submitting the documentation to, they need to be able to see all the detail for Joe Smith and Dan Smith and each line of where they worked. But they also have to have just a high level for cost center ABCD, what's the total amount that I'm billing, and cost center DEF, what's the total amount that I'm billing. And on some of them, I have to split out the markup at that summary level. So I use sum if functions to basically insert all that data and then let the formulas give me the totals. And I go back and check it. It's a lot more accurate than the manual process that we did before because there was a lot of errors that would come into that. So by using sum if at the bottom of that data, I can see right here, okay, for project ABCD, I have $100,000 in labor hours. I have $50,000 in their work comp that we paid. I have $60,000 in their SUDA that we paid, and then rolling all that up. And so by that sum if, it's looking through all those 400 lines of data on employees worked, and it's just adding up project ABCD. And I have to use some ifs with multiple because it's looking through for, first of all, are they a craft type or are they a staff type? So we have to check that, and then checking for the project number to get the right one. So I really appreciated seeing that in there. These are a lot of things that I've learned much more painfully over time. And had I several years ago been able to taken a class like this in Excel, I definitely would have had a higher value. I don't know for myself, because of the roles that I had, how much I would have used it. The role that I'm currently in is definitely the one that uses Excel most heavily and demands the most heavy understanding of Excel advanced functions and the data relationships between the variables. My previous work, we used SAP, and so I could run reports from that, but the system was really doing most of the heavy lifting. And with the current system I'm using, I'm pulling data out and then doing the heavy lifting through Excel. So I have to understand that, and I have to understand where I might make errors. The other thing that has really been beneficial in understanding these relationships is just understanding the one-to-one or one-to-many for vendors or entities. Now, I have, I don't know how this shows up very well, but in our recent company transformation, system integration, we moved from using UltiPro Payroll and Lawson accounting software to using ADP Payroll and Sage Intacct. So in going through that, I had to be able to, I wasn't building the system. I wasn't a business analyst. I wasn't a heavy IT person, but I did need to know the relationship of one-to-one or one-to-many. So I have this folder as an example, because this is some of the different pieces and parts. So this is my company, and within my company, I have 2 different entities, and within one entity, I'm doing multiple different pieces. And then in my other entity, I'm doing multiple pieces. I have multiple pieces that then have multiple pieces inside of that, kind of like a folder within a folder. And so I had to be able to speak to that in terms of relationships. So, some of the questions that we had going through integration, I had to be able to speak in data language and variable relationships. So our representative would ask me, okay, how do you need your project set up? Do you need, do you have one project for one company? Do you have multiple projects within one company? And then within that, how does that break down? So in one company that I work with, because I have 2 subsidiaries, I work with one, and they have a project that then may have 1 or 2 tasks. And within each of those tasks, there's 1 employee assigned, only 1 person. So I had to be able to communicate one-to-one-to-one. Or in my other company, we do projects, and we might have 5 or 6 different tasks, and all of our employees under that company are going to do work potentially on all of those tasks. So it's a one-to-many. And then also talking about vendors. Are my vendors, what is their relationship in their variables? And do I have one vendor that does work for both companies? Are they separate vendors? And that kind of stuff. So I really found it interesting in chapter 3, just kind of seeing the presentation of those relationship variables laid out in that way, as opposed to kind of the way that I learned it, which was just sort of as you go. And in these conversations, it was much more on the job training and kind of figuring it out as I went, and understanding through communication what was needed, and then learning the answers to that so that I could communicate that. And it's definitely something that a lot of people would struggle with to learn on the job, because it's difficult to understand what to communicate if you don't already have sort of a fluency in the language that's being spoken. So for accountants, speaking in data language to IT people that are setting things up, and that can be a really big gap, especially, in systems where the system is already doing it for you. Prior to this, when we used Lawson, it was not very user-friendly, and we did have IT people and business analysts that would build us reports. But to be able to, as an accountant, in my role, go to a business analyst and say, hey, I need a report that does X, Y, Z, I had to also be able to kind of speak in their language, or I had to be talking to someone that could speak in accounting language. And that's something that's really difficult. Most people they are in their function, whether that's operations and field work, or upper management, or IT, or payroll, and they kind of speak in their own language, and they're not. It's really difficult to speak to another function and speak the language that they speak to communicate your need and your function, and understanding the relationship variables is just so helpful to that.